Let's go ahead and get into the next chapter of the borrowers. In the last chapter, Arrietty snuck upstairs while her dad was upstairs so she could see if the boy ever got her letter or what happened. So she's talked to the boy. He said he got a letter back, and it said, "Tell Lupe to come home." And she didn't know what that meant. She kind of thought maybe the boy wrote it, but she's not really sure. So, chapter 14. Oh, and then Pod walked in. He was not sure if he saw her talking to the boy or not, so she doesn't know. Pod did not speak until they reached the sitting room, nor did he look at her. She had had to scramble after him as best she might. He ignored her efforts to help him shut the gates, but once, when she tripped, he had waited until she got up again, watching her, it seemed, almost without interest while she brushed the dust off her knees. Supper was laid and ironing put away, and Homily came running in from the kitchen, surprised to see them together. Pod threw down his borrowing bag. He stared at his wife. "What's the matter?" faltered Homily, looking from one to the other. "She was in the night nursery," said Pod quietly, "talking to that boy." Homily moved forward, her hands clasped tremblingly against her apron. Her startled eyes flickering swiftly to and fro. "Oh, no," she breathed. Pod sat down. He ran a tired hand over his eyes and forehead. His face looked heavy like a piece of dough. "Now what?" he said. Homily stood quite still, bowed over her clasped hands, and stared at Arrietty. "Oh, you never," she whispered. "Oh, they're frightened," Arrietty realized. "They're not angry at all. They're very, very frightened." She moved forward. "It's all right," she began. Homily sat down suddenly on the cotton spool. She had begun to tremble. "Oh," she said, "whatever shall we do?" She began to rock herself very slightly to and fro. "Oh, Mother, don't," pleaded Arrietty. "It isn't so bad as that. It really isn't." She felt up the front of her jersey. At first she could not find the letter. It had slid around her side to the back. But at last she drew it out, very crumpled. "Look," she said, "here's a letter from Uncle Hendry. I wrote to him, and the boy took the letter." "You wrote to him?" cried Homily in a kind of suppressed shriek. "Oh," she moaned, and closed her eyes. "Whatever next? Whatever shall we do?" And she fanned herself limply with her bony hand. "Get your mother a drink of water, Arrietty," said Pod sharply. Arrietty brought it in a sawed-off hazel shell. It had been sawed off at the pointed end and was shaped like a brandy glass. "But whatever made you do such a thing, Arrietty?" said Homily more calmly, setting the empty cup down on the table. "Whatever came over you?" So Arrietty told them about being seen that day under the cherry tree, and how she had kept it from them not to worry them, and what the boy said about dying out, and how more than important, how imperative it had seemed to make sure the Hendrerys were alive. "But do understand," pleaded Arrietty. "Please understand. I'm trying to save the race." "The expressions she uses," said Homily to Pod under her breath, not without pride. Because by saying I wanted to save the race, that meant all of the borrowers and people like them. And Homily, even though she's upset, thought, well, she's pretty smart the way she says that. But Pod was not listening. "Save the race," he repeated grimly. "It's people like you, my girl, who do things sudden-like, with no respect for tradition, who will finish us borrowers once for all. Don't you see what you done?" Arrietty met his accusing eyes. "Yes," she said falteringly, I've got in touch with the only other one still alive, so that," she went on bravely, "from now on we can all stick together." "All stick together?" Pod repeated angrily. "Do you think Hendrery's lot would have ever come to live back here? Can you see your mother immigrating to the Badger set? 2 fields away, out in the open? No hot water laid on?" "Never!" cried Homily in a full, rich voice, which made them both turn and look at her. "Or do you see your mother walking across 2 fields and a garden?" went on Pod. 2 fields full of crows and cows and horses and whatnot, to take a cup of tea with your Aunt Lupe, whom she never liked much anyway. But wait, he said as Arrietty tried to speak, that's not the point. As far as all that goes, we're just where we was. The point, he went on, leaning forward and speaking with great solemnity, is this. That boy knows now where we live.
Oh no, said Arrietty. I never told him that.
You told him, interrupted Pod, about the kitchen pipe bursting. You told him how all our stuff got washed away to the grating. He sat back again, glaring at her. He's only got to think. He pointed out. Arrietty was silent, and Pod went on. That's a thing that's never happened before. Never in the whole lying history of the borrowers. Borrowers have been seen, yes. Borrowers have been caught, maybe. But no human being has ever known where any borrower lived. We're in very grave danger, Arrietty, and you put us there. And that's a fact.
Oh, Pod, whimpered Homily, don't frighten the child.
Nay, Homily, said Pod more gently, my poor old girl, I don't want to frighten no one, but this is serious. Suppose I said to you, pack up tonight all our bits and pieces. Where would you go?
Oh, not to Hendreary's,
cried Homily.
Not there, Pod. Oh, I could never share a kitchen with Lupe.
No, agreed Pod, not to Hendreary's. And don't you see for why? The boy knows about that too.
Oh,
cried Homily in real dismay. Yes, said Pod, couple of smart terriers or a well-trained ferret, and that'd be the end of that lot.
Oh, Pod,
said Homily, and began again to tremble. The thought of living in a badger set had been bad enough, but the thought of not having even that to go to seemed almost worse. And
I dare say I could have got it nice in the end, she said, providing we lived quite separate.
Well, it's no good thinking on it now, said Pod. He turned to Arrietty. What does your Uncle Hendreary say in his letter?
Yes, exclaimed Homily. Where's this letter? Well, it doesn't say much, said Arrietty, passing over the paper. It just says, tell your Aunt Lupe to come home.
What? Exclaimed Homily sharply, looking at the letter upside down.
Come home? What can he mean?
Remember, she can't read, so she's holding it upside down because she doesn't know which way the letters really go. He means, said Pod, that Lupe must have set off to come here, and that she never arrived.
Set off to come here? Repeated Homily. But when?
How should I know? Said Pod.
Well, it doesn't say when, said Arrietty.
But, exclaimed Homily,
it might have been weeks ago.
It might, said Pod. Long enough anyway for him to want her back.
Oh, cried Homily, all those poor little children.
Oh, they're growing up now, said Pod.
But something must have happened to her,
exclaimed Homily. Yes, said Pod. He turned to Arrietty. See what I mean, Arrietty? About those fields?
Oh, Pod, said Homily, her eyes full of tears, I don't suppose none of us'll ever see poor Lupe again.
Well, we wouldn't have had anyway.
Pod, said Homily soberly, I'm frightened. Everything seems to be happening at once. What are we going to do?
Well, said Pod, there's nothing we can do tonight, that's for certain, but have a bit of supper and a good night's rest. He rose to his feet.
Oh, Arrietty,
wailed Homily suddenly.
You naughty, wicked girl! How could you go and start all this? How could you go and talk to a human being? If only I was seen, said Arrietty. I couldn't help being seen. Papa was seen. I don't think it's all as awful as you trying to make it out. I don't think human beings are all that bad.
There's bad, and they're good, said Pod. They're honest, and they're artful. It's just as it takes 'em at the moment. And animals, if they could talk, would say the same. Steer clear of 'em. That's what I've always been told. No matter what they promise you, no good never really came to no one from any human being.